Hello, light-hearted Rainbow Tribe. Let us be still for a bit and listen. How did that go? Were you able to be still and listen? I love listening. It's part of what's prompted this video today, is to share my love of listening. I started listening very young. I was informed that children should be seen and not heard. And in general, you could say that speaking was not entirely safe. And you could probably say that that's still true in the world. Speaking is not entirely safe. Oops, things are moving here. So I learned to listen. And yet there was a lot of speaking going on inside my head. And I've discovered, since then, that that's not really optimal either. So, listening. Sorry, my little doohickey here is not settling down. It's just moving all over the place. Mercury's retrograde, technology, and my brain. Okay. I love to listen. So I learned a lot about listening in all of my years of training, and you could call it professional practice, spiritual practice, anything you want. But to me, it's a basic life skill, and it's not one that we do well at all, honestly. Because if you just pay attention to your listening, you will notice how often there's a yada, 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 yada going on. What you think about this, what you feel about this, what you want to say about this, that you're hearing, that you're taking in. So you're actually not fully listening to someone. You're already in your stream of consciousness, coming to your conclusions and your decisions about what it is you're listening to. Oh, this is just like that. Or they don't really mean that. Or what they really mean is, or da-da-da-da-da. It doesn't matter if you're listening to a piece of music. It doesn't matter if you're listening to your lover, or what you're listening to. And of course, the most highly recommended listening post is Within to the Still Small Voice, which doesn't speak. Not in, mental conceptions. It may utilize the mind to articulate what it's expressing, so that our pure language-dependent minds might actually take in the information. But actually, it speaks in a very different form. And so it's useful to give ourselves some quiet time, free from thinking about, bringing a halt to this constant stream of consciousness, yada, yada, yadaing, evaluating and examining, and so much activity. And to recognize that we can do perfectly well without all of that. And it starts with getting quiet and listening in the quiet to the quiet. But as a life skill, it's essential to be able to hear innocently, not knowing that wisdom, that wise innocence of a child who hasn't got a lot of stuff that they're thinking about. But they're listening, they're taking in information, and they're taking it in at all kinds of different levels and dimensions. They listen with their bodies, their hearts, their souls, their minds, their spirits. Because, with pretty decent childhoods, it all hasn't been broken down and separated out and disconnected from. And so to be like a child is to learn to listen without all of this data and information that we've got, and the reward that comes from being able to speak and sound informed and authoritarian, like you know what you're talking about. I haven't got a clue what I'm talking about. I'm listening, even as I speak, even in this moment. The whole inner aspect of my being is listening to what's arising to express itself, right? And so what I discovered in all of this listening is that everything is a vehicle of expression for the divine. I'm just going to say that one more time with feeling. Everything is a vehicle of expression for the divine. So listen up. That includes our bodies and our hearts, our souls and our spirits. It includes the food that we eat, the people that we're speaking with and listening to. It includes the trees, the mountains, the flowers, the sky, the clouds, the whole earth, the stars, the sun. Nothing is left out because everything is this expressing itself. So in our state of disconnection and I want to call it mental self-aggrandizement. Whew, there's some words for you. We hardly listen at all, except to our minds, and we give our minds and a kind of an impeachable, I'm going to call it an impeachable authority. Let's impeach that mind from this position of power that it shouldn't have, and learn to listen essentially and deeply, innocently, without knowing, and allowing ourselves to be informed. Informed by our bodies, by this infinite intelligence that expresses itself in this incredible vehicle of physical formation that's just amazing. And its capabilities and capacities, when it's allowed to express itself and be heard and, attended to. Unbelievable wealth of information. It knows what it needs to eat. It knows when it needs to sleep. It knows if you've been good or bad. It has nothing to do with good or bad, of course. But what we've done with having externalized ourselves and allowing our minds to be the final authority in who we are and what we do is that we've created a situation of disenfranchisement within ourselves. And I recently, I think, called it a schism of mutual disaffection. And this internal war is externalizing itself around the planet. So I'm really talking about something much more serious than it might appear. The capacity to listen. And in order to listen innocently and wisely, we have to get quiet and allow ourselves to take in information and allow our whole system to digest the information that we've taken in. And still remaining quiet, allow that to come up into its own natural expression and movement. And if you really listen to what I just said, you realize it took no thought at all. Now, the mind is also an avenue of expression, but its best use is to express what is discerned by listening. Duba's just listening to a dove. I don't know if you heard it back there. So this life skill, let's call it a life skill, and this sacred life is ours if we will but learn to listen to the voices all around us, and then listen and watch carefully the meaning that we make. I think I talked about meaning making recently. It's a huge power of the human being to be able to make meaning. We do that terribly also because it's based in so much stuff that we're unconscious of, that we don't really recognize or pay attention to. It's once again, we just believe what the mind says, and we're not paying attention to where that comes from and how deeply in separation it's conditioned to. And so frequently it's reactivity based on conditioning in separation that's operating unconsciously. So if we can get quiet enough to listen to what arises, sometimes, as it'll arise while we're listening, it'll start its yada, yada, yada. And instead of believing it, which is what we mostly do, we believe it and say it and speak it like it's true. And the truth can't be spoken, so we're in trouble already. Subjective truths, yes, and we're not disregarding that. But really, when we want to express truth, it's vibrating in us and expressing through our movement and activity, which the best we can do with language is attempt to point to something that's beyond conceptions, beyond language. In order to do that, the mind has to be a vehicle of expression, not a thinker and a doing from thinking. To be a vehicle of expression, it has to be attuned to and listening to and expressing what is heard, not what it thinks about. There's a big difference there. One of the beautiful practices that I came upon in terms of listening to people to help the yada, yada, yada stop of the mind was, as words came out of someone's mouth, I would say them internally at the same time. It was really fun in this workshop to play with that, to listen to someone and have my mind say inside my head exactly what they were saying at the same time. And that helped me be right with them and enter into their experience of what they were expressing without my opinions getting in the middle of it all. No middleman. And it's one of the ways that we come close, because we can't really fully do it, but we can come close to being inside someone's shoes, walking in them, being inside their experience with them. And this is where true essential conversation, where real intimacy shows up, which is where our fulfillment in life, in relating with one another, comes from, and what we're missing and aching for. Listening deeply, quietly, innocently, and sometimes just saying, I don't really know what you meant, instead of making up our own ideas. It's like, can you say that again? Can you say it differently? Why? Because I really want to hear you. It's less important than my saying anything, quite honestly. And that's such a gift, and such a longed for gift. Gosh, do you really ever sit there and wonder, has anyone ever really truly heard me? And how much we long to be heard? And not with judgment, and not with resistance, and not with fixing, and not with how you're going to be helped, and not with any of that stuff, but genuinely, respectfully, heartfully, being taken in, being heard fully, and in that being able to even dive deeper into your own experience and hear it more deeply, because there's somebody with you listening that deeply. So there's no quickness to respond. There's a lot of quietness. And in that quietness, there's space. And there's space for us to be as we are, without having to fit or belong or figure out, what does somebody else want to hear, so I'll be okay. I'll be acceptable. Maybe I'll even be loved. If you really watch how often you do that, it's really sad. How much we try to figure out what the other person that's listening to us half-assedly wants to hear, so that maybe they'll get, relaxed and quiet and hear us a little more. And the other side of it, of course, is when we're telling our story rather than sharing our experience. Telling our story is usually up here, thinking about and talking about, rather than being right here, right now, in my experience, listening within to my being, a physical body on planet Earth, and listening to all the communication that's going on within me, and finding what's really alive within right now and wants to be said. And that's all that's happening here, is this listening within, and wanted to speak about listening. And the depths and the richness of truly listening. I love that this bird is here. Saying its piece, literally. Oh. So I hope this encourages more listening, less talking, all the way around, internal, yada, 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 and even speaking. Really going slowly, slowing down enough to really listen deeply and discover what it is that wants to arise to express itself. Recognizing that as human beings, we have a unique capacity to listen consciously at depths and levels that are not well known in other species, at least not so far as we know. There may be other intelligent species, and certainly their awareness is also listening. They listen to vibrations. They hear and feel the vibrations, and their movement reacts and responds to that. And it's the same thing with, radar, with, how whales speak to one another. You begin to notice that everything is actually in conversation, an essential conversation. And deep observers of nature will be able to tell you what it is that they're all saying to each other, because they're practiced listeners, observers. And in the discovery, based on the actions that occur as a result of the communication that's happened, recognize what was just communicated. And then they get quiet enough to listen. And the beauty that we have from the indigenous peoples around the planet who have made, being in union and communion with the planet and all of her species, their lives, and recognize everything is not only communicating, but it's medicine. It's bringing forth a particular essence of being that has something to offer us, that contributes to our well-being. And so if we listen to the wisdom of the body as the ancients had to, because they didn't have the internet and Wikipedia and Google and everything else to, go find out what they need to know, they had to listen, and they had to listen to their bodies. Just like in nature, animals listen to their bodies. And they get hurt, and they go and are sick, and they go and they seek a certain plant to eat it. Well, we used to do that too. And we used to listen and pay close enough attention to know where it was that the plant was that we would need to eat to restore our well-being. We are so disconnected, and it's part of our sickness. So listening is the remedy that is being offered you right now. Just not only be still and know that I am, and listen up to the still small voice, but including in that this that we can listen to is in everything, everywhere, all around us, all the time. How wonderful. How outrageously fantastic. I hope that listening becomes an adventure, a playfulness in life, and one that informs you very deeply in your movements in the world, for what you're here for, where you need to go, when you need to get there. All of that stuff. It's all speaking to us if we would just listen up. So one of my little sayings is, when you're SOL, SOL, shut up, open up, listen up. And it's so beautiful to listen to the peace that is within all of the noise. As a friend of mine recently said, speaking about her family, the chaotic cacophony. That was a phrase her cousin came up with. The chaotic cacophony of her family. Lots of ja, 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 ja. And at high volume. Why? Because they're not being heard. Nobody's slowing down enough to listen. In fact, they cut each other off before the sentence is even done with their response, because they know what the other person is saying. Oh my God. And that's, we hear it in modern music, right? They make an art form out of chaotic cacophony. And, I recently listened to some modern music. I have a hard time with it because I'm like sitting there longing for the harmony to please finally come. It just grates on my nerves. And I think it grates on everybody's nerves. It's a level of stress that we have in life. So we're listening to what's underneath the surface, always. And we take in the surface information, but we're listening deeper. And we're listening to what's not being said at the same time as we're listening to what's being said. And in that, we sometimes encourage people to reveal some of the stuff that they feel really unsafe about sharing. And so it stays locked up inside them, which keeps a separation going. And that's really sad. So good listening is part of the safety that we're longing to have in our society. To be able to be as we are and to be heard in a way that's got no conditions, evaluations, judgments, or opinions. That just innocently, reverently, as silent awareness itself, listens. And when it's accurate as we're listening within at the same time, the response just naturally arises, and it arises from an infinite intelligence that's not separate, from a boundless love that's already in unity between the parties that are speaking to each other. Our minds can't ever come up with that on its own. Not possible. So the response is always so much more accurate and so much more appreciated when it comes from we haven't got a clue what to say or do. And these have been some of my most amazing teaching moments, is to sit in conversation with someone and have not a clue what to say or do. And trust me, I did a lot of work to learn a whole lot of stuff about what to say and do. And finally it was all defeated in order to reveal what accomplishes everything. Thank you for listening. Many blessings.